Welcome to another edition of Cracking the IR Code. Before I get started with this week's case study, I actually wanted to share with you that I am offering a free webinar that is coming up on Tuesday, September 17th. And this will be a live webinar from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can register at shop.radrx.com. You can see there on the bottom of the screen, the link to register is shop.radrx.com. And this is approved for AAPC credit. And it is also approved for CIRCC and CCC in addition to the core credentials. So this is a great way to earn a free CE. So I invite you to register and join me on the 17th. If for some reason you are unable to make the live program, on-demand access will be available following the live program. So let's get into our case study for this week. So I chose a case with diagnostic angiography, specifically with a pulmonary angiogram and a phrenic angiogram, because from time to time I get questions on coding for phrenic angiography. So that is one of the reasons why I picked this case. So let's take a look at what we have. So we have a patient who presents with an incidentally identified asymptomatic vascular anomaly in the right lower lobe. Now the patient is coming for catheter-based imaging because a pulmonary arteriovenous malformation is suspected. So as always, we're going to start with our numbered procedure list and get a feel for what the physician is doing. So you'll notice right off the bat, based on the highlights, that we actually have two separate access sites that are being utilized to perform this procedure. We have an access at the right common femoral artery, and then we also have an access at that right common femoral vein as well. So we see a procedure being performed through the arterial system, and then we see a procedure being performed through the venous system. And we have the ability to report code 76937 2 times. We are permitted to report it once per access, and we have our required documentation here in our procedure list, numbers 1 and 4. In addition to the access for both sides being documented, we see that the physician does a right common femoral arteriogram, a right phrenic arteriogram, and a right pulmonary arteriogram before performing closure of the arteriotomy and the venotomy that was utilized. So let's get into the details of the procedure. So we start out with access in the right groin. So that is the first line that's highlighted. Then when we scroll over to page 2, we see that a sheath was introduced into that right common femoral artery, and then a right common femoral arteriogram was performed. Now you will note that we are not going to code for the right common femoral arteriogram because we have no diagnostic findings. This is non-diagnostic in nature. In fact, even when we go back and look at the clinical indication for the procedure, the intention is to evaluate the pulmonary system and not actually the extremity. So that's also another reason why we would not code it, even if we did have some findings. There are occasions where the physician may inject contrast upon puncturing the vessel just to see whether or not they can move the catheter through the vessel and perform the procedure in that manner. So from there, the catheter is then introduced into the abdominal aorta. So at that point, we would have a 36200 for our aortogram, but the 36200 is going to end up being deleted because we're going to move into a situation where we have a selective catheterization. Now notice for the abdominal aortogram that's performed, I also noted that it's non-diagnostic and we're not going to code that. Reason being is when you look at the rest of the report, you look at the findings, you look at the impression, we do not see any diagnostic findings documented for the abdominal aorta. We only see findings documented for the phrenic arteriogram that was performed, and then also that right pulmonary arteriogram as well. So we don't see anything that supports coding separately for an abdominal aortogram. However, even if we did, the 75625 ends up being bundled with the 75726. That aortography will always be bundled with 75726. So then from the aorta, the catheter goes into the right phrenic artery, which is directly off the aorta. The right phrenic artery is going to be below the diaphragm. So that is why we see code 36245 being assigned for that first order catheterization. And then once the catheter goes in the right phrenic, a right phrenic arteriogram was performed. So coders sometimes ask, what code do I use for the right phrenic arteriogram? Well, what you'll find is that 75726 is going to be assigned whenever an organ is being evaluated. 75726 actually has very widespread use when we're talking about diagnostic imaging that is occurring in the abdomen. Obviously, if you go to read the code description, it mentions visceral angiography in the code description. But basically, what you're looking for to use this code is whether or not an organ is being evaluated via a vessel that is coming directly off of the aorta. And that is exactly what is occurring here, because again, if we go back to the clinical indication, the whole purpose of doing the exam is to evaluate, if we go back to the top and look at our clinical indication, a pulmonary arteriovenous malformation. So we're actually looking at a malformation in the lung potentially. So that's what we're going to assign for that. We're going to use 75726. So at this point in the procedure, we have 36245 and 75726 for the work that is performed through in the arterial system. Now we're jumping over to the venous access. And so the pulmonary arterial system is actually accessed through the vein. So here we have the right common femoral vein was accessed. Then the catheter goes into the right atrium, then goes into the main pulmonary artery, which is 36013, but the catheter does not stay in the main pulmonary artery. It goes on into the right pulmonary artery, which is going to be a 36014 for that particular catheterization. And then a right pulmonary arteriogram is performed, which is going to be reported with 75741 with that RT. So we have some selective imaging that occurred in that right pulmonary, and then the physician places a star-closed device at the right common femoral arteriotomy, and then pressure was utilized to close the venotomy. So we're going to jump down into the findings, and we're going to make sure that we have diagnostic findings for the imaging that was performed. We see the findings documented for the right phrenic arteriogram, and then we also see the findings documented for the right pulmonary arteriogram as well. And then the impression is reiterating those findings that we saw from those catheterizations and contrast injections. So let's take a look at our codes in summary. So we have our 36245 for catheterization of that phrenic artery, 36014 for catheterization of the right pulmonary artery, and then we're going to use 75726 for that phrenic arteriogram. So whenever you have a vessel that is coming directly off of the aorta, you are going to potentially use the 75726 when imaging is performed to evaluate an internal organ. So here in the bullet point, I mentioned selective imaging of an artery arising from the thoracic aorta. It may not necessarily only be the thoracic aorta. So just FYI on that, it's really going to be an artery arising from the aorta. So I just want to make that clear. Commonly, it's the thoracic aorta, but in this case, we're going with a vessel that's directly off of the abdominal aorta, and that same logic is going to apply. And then, of course, we have 75741, which is specific for the selective imaging of the right pulmonary artery. And then we can assign the 76937 one time for each access. So you can report that with modifier 59. You can also use modifier XS, indicating that it is going to be a separate structure. And then if you're coding for the facility, this is on the facility side, you may report G0269 for placement of the star close. Okay, so that is the case for this week. And I just want to remind everyone, if you have not heard yet, if you have not seen it yet, there is a new product called Radcoder that I highly recommend that you check out. And so what I'm going to do right now, real quickly to end our video for this week, is I'm actually going to just walk you through how to enter a basic procedure in Radcoder. So if you're someone that is struggling with coding for interventional radiology procedures, you have trouble keeping track of all the steps, then this is a product that you may want to check out to help you code those procedures. And we do offer a free, when I say we, I mean Radcoder, and I say we, but it's Radcoder that offers it. I just work with them promoting the product because I love the product there. So there is a 30-day free trial where you can give it a test drive and see how you like it. And then from there, you can actually purchase a subscription. So, okay, so I'm just going to show you how to enter a basic procedure. So what you would do when you're coding a report, you would actually read the report and then abstract all the steps of the procedure and then enter those here into Radcoder. So you would right click to do your access. So here we're doing access over at that common femoral there on the right. Then from there, we can go in and mark what is being done. So let's do some imaging. Well, we'll just zoom in here. We'll do some imaging of the common carotid. So we're going to right click on the common carotid. And then we have the ability to select carotid cervical imaging when it's only of the carotids. We also have the ability to select carotid cerebral imaging when the internal carotids are being studied from the contrast injection. So for right now, I'm going to select carotid cervical imaging. And what you'll notice, I don't know if you were watching in that bottom right-hand corner, the codes actually change like in real time. So we started with a 36140 with access. Then as soon as I selected the carotid cervical imaging, we got catheterization code 36215. We don't have an imaging code yet. Okay, the code hasn't changed yet because we want to confirm in our operative report that the physician truly did a diagnostic study and their diagnostic findings are documented. So when I check the findings documented box, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, that code is going to change to now the 36222 based on how I dialed in the procedure. So now let's say the physician didn't stop there and the physician actually placed the catheter up in the internal carotid. So we're going to do a right click there. And now we're going to select carotid cerebral imaging because now we're in the internal carotid. So I'm going to select that. Then again, I'm going to confirm the physician documented the findings in the report. I'm going to check the findings documented box, and then you'll see that the code now changes to 36224. And then we can come over into the vertebral, and I'm going to do a right click on the vertebral to do vertebral imaging. And then again, I would check the report from the physician to ensure that the findings were documented, and you'll see that it's going to report the appropriate code 36226. So this is just a brief overview of how Radcoder works. So I would encourage you to go out, sign up for your free trial at radcoder.com. That's radcoder.com. Give it a test drive for 30 days, and hopefully it will help you with your interventional radiology coding.